You used about 80 gallons of water today, and the terrifying reality is that you didn't think about a single one of them. You woke up and turned on the faucet, and the liquid lifeblood of civilization flowed out with pressure and consistency that we have come to treat as a fundamental right of birth. Yet those 80 gallons are a ghost in the machine, a temporary miracle of engineering that most of us take for granted until the very second it stops. The shower you took to wake up, the coffee you brewed with water that traveled hundreds of miles, the toilet you flushed without a second glance, and the pasta you boiled and then carelessly drained into the sink like it was an infinite resource. It is all part of an 80-gallon daily burn rate that we expect to repeat tomorrow and the day after and for the rest of our lives. But tomorrow those 80 gallons won't show up because of magic. They show up because of an aging, cracking, and over-leveraged system of infrastructure that was built for a world that no longer exists. Systems break. And right now, there are 7 major American cities where the water system isn't just failing. It is collapsing under the weight of 5 specific, measurable metrics that we have analyzed to reveal a truth that no local politician or real estate developer wants to admit. This isn't a theoretical climate model gathering dust on a government server in Washington, D.C. This is a real-time extraction of a finite resource that is being depleted faster than nature can ever hope to replenish it. The reservoirs are draining to levels that expose the skeletons of old towns. The aquifers are collapsing into permanent geological failures that can never be refilled. The pipes under our streets are literally older than our grandparents, and yet the population is still growing, still moving in, still signing 30-year mortgages in the desert, and still turning on those faucets with the blind assumption that water is a constant. Hydrologists are the ones who stay awake at night because they know the terrifying math of water. By the time the average citizen notices a water crisis, that crisis is already 10 or 15 years old. The reservoir didn't empty yesterday. It has been emptying for decades while we built golf courses and swimming pools on top of it. We built a comprehensive scoring system to track this collapse, utilizing 5 vital signs that tell the story of city survival or its inevitable end. Metric 1 is a reservoir trend. Think of this as a city's checking account. The surface water we can see in lakes and dams. And if that balance has been dropping for 10 straight years, that is a streak of bad luck. It's a structural deficit that hope cannot fix. Metric 2 is aquifer depletion. The invisible savings account buried miles beneath our feet in ancient rock formations that took 10,000 years to fill. The dark truth of aquifers is that once you pump them past a critical point, the rock layers above them compress. The ground literally sinks, and the space that once held the water is crushed forever. You cannot refill a crushed sponge, and that water is never coming back. Metric 3 is the population capacity ratio, which measures a dangerous game of cramming 10 people into a 5-person lifeboat. The boat doesn't sink the moment the 6th person climbs in, but every new resident brings a water line closer to the edge until one day, a single wave of drought flips the whole thing over. Metric 4 is the 2030 climate projections, which aren't crystal balls, but cold, hard data from NOAA and the IPCC showing that the heat is rising and the precipitation is failing in the very places where we are building the most houses. And finally, Metric 5 is infrastructure age, the rotting heart of the system, where some of our greatest cities are losing 40% of their treated water to leaky, rusted pipes before it ever reaches a single home. We ran every major U.S. metro through these 5 metrics, and 7 cities didn't just fail. They broke the scale entirely, and if you live in one of these cities, you are living on borrowed time and borrowed water. Your home's value, your job security, and your children's schools are all tethered to supply that may not exist in 4 or 5 years. And the reason you haven't received a memo about this is that the system doesn't work that way. The memo only arrives when the faucet stops, and by then, 4 million other people are reading the same memo at the exact same time, creating a panic that no government can contain. So, let me be that memo for you. Before we start the countdown of these 7 cities, you must realize that lists don't save people understanding the data saves people. We begin at number 7, Denver, Colorado, the city running on melting snow. Denver is a mile-high city, a place of craft breweries, booming tech hubs, and migration of thousands of people who want a mountain lifestyle. But Denver is an engineering paradox. It doesn't sit on a Great Lake, and it doesn't have a massive aquifer to fall back on. Instead, it survives by stealing water from the other side of the mountains. Denver's entire lifeblood depends on snowpack in the Rocky Mountains, which is captured in reservoirs like Lake Granby and Dillon Reservoir, and then piped through massive tunnels like the Moffat Tunnel that cut directly under the Continental Divide. It was a 20th century engineering marvel, but the 20th century had a lot more snow than the 21st century does. The math for Denver is brutal. NOAA projects a 15 to 25% reduction in Colorado's snowpack by the year 2030, and that isn't a worst-case doomsday scenario. It's the median projection. Meanwhile, the Denver metro area has added over 500,000 residents since 2010, meaning more people are competing for a shrinking pile of snow. Denver's backup, the Denver Basin Aquifer, is currently dropping by roughly 2 feet every single year, and the Colorado River, which feeds into their system, has been in a state of decline for over 2 decades. You can see the bathtub ring on the river's reservoirs from space, a white scar on the canyon walls that represents billions of gallons of missing water. Denver's infrastructure is currently holding, with an average pipe age of 55 years, but they are negotiating from a position of absolute weakness in the Colorado River Compact renegotiations. Every percentage point of water they lose to downstream states like Arizona and California is a percentage point they cannot replace. The irony is that people move to Denver for the mountains, but the mountains are exactly what are failing them. By 2030, if the snowpack drops by that projected 25%, Denver will be forced into Stage 3 water restrictions, no outdoor watering, mandatory rationing, and a supply gap that could reach 20% no secondary source to close it. This is the best-case scenario on our list, the city that is actually the most prepared, which should tell you exactly how terrifying the next 6 cities are going to be. If Denver is a warning about the sky drying up, then number 6 on our list is a warning about the earth itself turning against us, because Miami, Florida, represents a category of water crisis that is almost entirely unique in the modern world, a city that is drowning in water and yet dying of thirst. The geography of Miami is a beautiful, sun-drenched lie. It is a city built on a foundation of porous limestone, a prehistoric coral reef that sits just feet above a rising ocean. And while every other city on this list worries about lack of rain, Miami has to worry about the ocean drinking its aquifer from the bottom up. To understand Miami's fragility, you have to understand the Biscayne Aquifer, a shallow, 4,000 square mile underground reservoir that provides every single drop of drinking water for over 6 million people in the Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach metros. Unlike the deep, protected aquifers of the Midwest, the Biscayne is a superficial aquifer, meaning it is essentially a giant, wet sponge sitting right at the surface. And because limestone is so incredibly porous, water moves through it with terrifying speed. For 100 years, humans in South Florida performed one of the greatest engineering blunders in history. They drained the Everglades to build suburbs, pushing the fresh water out to sea to create dry land. But in doing so, they destroyed the head pressure, the weight of fresh water that kept the Atlantic Ocean at bay. Now, as the sea level rises due to thermal expansion and glacial melt, the Atlantic is pushing back with a vengeance. This isn't a future projection. It is a measured, documented invasion known as saltwater intrusion. The United States Geological Survey has been tracking the saltwater wedge, a literal wall of salt water that is moving inland through the rock. And in some parts of Miami-Dade County, that wedge is advancing at a rate of 1,000 feet every single year. As that salt reaches the western well fields where the city's massive pumps sit, the water becomes undrinkable. Once a well is salted, you cannot simply flush the salt out. The well is dead, and the infrastructure required to treat salt water, known as reverse osmosis desalination, is 10 times more expensive and requires a decade to build. Miami has no major surface reservoirs to fall back on. It has no mountain snowpack and no distant river to pipe in. Its only other hope is Lake Okeechobee to the north, but that lake is already overallocated to the powerful sugar industry, ecologically damaged by toxic algae blooms, and physically contained by the Herbert Hoover Dike, which is a constant failure risk. The infrastructure in Miami is another ticking time bomb. The average pipe age is 40 years. But these aren't just any pipes. They are pipes buried in corrosive, salty, porous coral rock that acts like a grinding stone every time the earth shifts. The system was designed for a population of maybe 3 million people in the mid-20th century. But today, 6 million are drinking from it, and 1,000 more arrive every week. By 2030, the consensus estimate is an additional 6 to 12 inches of sea level rise, which is a physical tipping point where the pressure of the ocean overcomes the remaining pressure of the aquifer. When that happens, the saltwater wedge will accelerate past the final barriers, forcing Miami-Dade to abandon its primary extraction points. You won't see this crisis on the news as a sudden explosion. You will see it as a slow, agonizing rise in your water bill, a strange metallic taste in the tap water of coastal neighborhoods, and eventually a mass exodus of the wealthy to the high ground of the interior, leaving the rest of the population to navigate a city where the water coming up through the sewers is salt and the water coming out of the taps is gone. Most people hear water crisis and think of the desert, but in Miami, the crisis is the ocean itself, rising up through the very ground you stand on to reclaim the land. And if the unseen invasion of salt in Miami is terrifying, the mathematical certainty of number 5 on our list is even worse. San Antonio, Texas, is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, a sprawling, vibrant metro of 2 million people that is currently adding residents at a rate that would make most governors jealous. But San Antonio is a city built on a geological knife edge. Nearly 100% of its water supply comes from a single volatile source, the Edwards Aquifer. To understand San Antonio's risk, you have to understand the difference between a sand aquifer and a karst aquifer. Most aquifers are like buckets of wet sand where the water moves slowly, but the Edwards is a karst system. It is a massive network of limestone caves, underground rivers, and honeycomb rock that can fill up in a single week of heavy rain and empty out just as fast during a drought. It is the most productive aquifer in the world, but it is also the most unstable. San Antonio is drinking from a single straw, and that straw is controlled by a tiny hole in the ground known as the J17 index well. This well is a heartbeat of the city. If the water level in J17 drops below 660 feet, the Edwards Aquifer Authority triggers mandatory pumping cuts, and if it drops below 650 feet, the city enters a state of emergency. In the last decade, San Antonio has danced on the edge of these triggers more times than in the previous 50 years combined. Central Texas is known as Flash Flood Alley, a region of extreme weather where you are either drowning or dying of thirst, with no middle ground. As the climate shifts toward 2030, the 100-degree days that San Antonio residents consider a normal part of summer are projected to become 110-degree days, and the evaporation rates from the city's few backup sources, like Medina Lake, are skyrocketing. Medina Lake, which was supposed to be the city's insurance policy, has dropped below 10% capacity multiple times in recent years, becoming little more than a dusty canyon with a puddle at the bottom. San Antonio has tried to innovate. They built a massive brackish water desalination plant and a multi-billion-dollar pipeline to bring water from other aquifers, but these are merely supplements. They cannot replace the sheer volume of water provided by the Edwards. The population capacity ratio is a silent killer here. San Antonio has grown by 20% since 2010, and every new subdivision, every new Toyota manufacturing plant, and every new data center is another straw being shoved into that same limestone sponge. People move to San Antonio because there is no state income tax. The houses are cheap in Austin and the economy is booming, but they are buying into a system that assumes the rain will always return just in time. The reality is that the Edwards Aquifer is a finite miracle. It is a savings account that is being drained faster than the deposits are coming in. By 2030, a sustained multi-year drought, which is now a statistical probability, not the J17 index well. This well is a heartbeat of the city. If the water level in J17 drops below 660 feet, the Edwards Aquifer Authority triggers mandatory pumping cuts, and if it drops below 650 feet, the city enters a state of emergency. In the last decade, San Antonio has danced on the edge of these triggers more times than in the previous 50 years combined. Central Texas is known as Flash Flood Alley, a region of extreme weather where you're either drowning or dying of thirst, with no middle ground. As the climate shifts toward 2030, the 100-degree days that San Antonio residents consider a normal part of summer are projected to become 110-degree days, and the evaporation rates from the city's few backup sources, like Medina Lake, are skyrocketing. Medina Lake, which was supposed to be the city's insurance policy, has dropped below 10% capacity multiple times in recent years, becoming little more than a dusty canyon with a puddle at the bottom. San Antonio has tried to innovate. They built a massive brackish water desalination plant and a multi-billion-dollar pipeline to bring water from other aquifers, but these are merely supplements. They cannot replace the sheer volume of water provided by the Edwards. The population capacity ratio is the silent killer here. San Antonio has grown by 20% since 2010, and every new subdivision, every new Toyota manufacturing plant, and every new data center is another straw being shoved into that same limestone sponge. People move to San Antonio because there is no state income tax. The houses are cheaper than Austin and the economy is booming, but they are buying into a system that assumes the rain will always return just in time. The reality is that the Edwards Aquifer is a finite miracle. It is a savings account that is being drained faster than the deposits are coming in. By 2030, a sustained multi-year drought, which is now a statistical probability. Not do we move now from the groundwater fragility of Texas to the absolute engineered desperation of the American Southwest, where number 4 on our list, Tucson, Arizona, represents a city that has already lost its war with nature and is currently living on a high-tech life support machine. If you walk the streets of Tucson, you see 1 million people living in the heart of the Sonoran Desert, surrounded by towering saguaro cacti and jagged mountains. But what you don't see is a geological ghost story beneath your feet. Tucson is a city that already ran out of its own water decades ago. By the 1970s, the local aquifers that had sustained the region for thousands of years were 80% depleted, pumped so aggressively to fuel the post-war housing boom that the very ground beneath the city began to fail. This is a phenomenon known as land subsidence, where the rock layers that once held water collapse under their own weight, causing the earth to literally sink and crack, creating fissures that can swallow roads and destroy foundations. Once that rock compresses, it is a permanent geological scar. Even if it rained for 100 years, the aquifer could never be refilled because the container no longer exists. Faced with total collapse, Tucson didn't stop growing. Instead, it doubled down on the most expensive and ambitious water project in American history, the Central Arizona Project, or the CAP. This is a 336-mile concrete river, an open-air canal that carries water from the Colorado River, lifts at nearly 3,000 feet in elevation using massive pumping stations, and drops it into the middle of the desert. This canal is Tucson's only lifeline. There is no plan B, there is no secret well, and there is no second river. But the CAP is a fragile miracle, and it is governed by the law of the river, a 100-year-old legal nightmare known as the Colorado River Compact. Under this compact, Arizona is a junior rights holder, a legal status that should terrify every homeowner in Tucson. It means that when the Colorado River fails, and it is failing right now, Arizona is the first state to take cuts, and California is the last. We have already seen Tier 1 cuts triggered, and as Lake Mead continues its agonizing decline toward Deadpool status, Tier 2 and Tier 3 cuts are inevitable. If Lake Mead drops below the 1,000-foot threshold, Tucson's allocation from the CAP could be slashed by 30 to 40% overnight. Imagine a city of 1 million people in the hottest desert in North America, losing nearly half of its water supply, with no local groundwater to fall back on. The climate projections for the Sonoran Desert through 2030 are a vision of furnace. 120-degree days are projected to increase by 40%. And at those temperatures, the evaporation from the open-air CAP canal is staggering. Millions of gallons of water are lost to the sky before they ever reach a Tucson faucet. The infrastructure itself is a single point of failure. 336 miles of concrete exposed to the elements, vulnerable to earthquakes, contamination, or simple structural fatigue. Tucson is a city that has outlived its environment. 1 million people huddled around a concrete straw that is being squeezed shut by a 20-year megadrought and a century of bad legal math. By 2030, the worst case for Tucson isn't just a drought. It is a total disconnection from the river that keeps it alive, leaving 1 million people in a basin where the wells are dry and the canal is empty. And if Tucson is a city on a straw, then number 3 on our list is a city on a web, a massive, sprawling, 13 million person metropolis that has spent a century stealing water from every corner of the West. Los Angeles, California, is perhaps the most water-dependent city in human history that nobody actually thinks of as water-dependent. When you think of LA, you think of palm trees, swimming pools, and the Pacific Ocean. But the reality is that 85% of the water that sustains the second-largest city in America is imported from hundreds of miles away. Los Angeles has almost no local water. Its primary aquifer, the San Fernando, is so heavily contaminated by industrial chemicals from the mid-20th century that much of it is undrinkable without massive, expensive treatment. The LA River is a concrete-lined storm drain that carries almost nothing but runoff. Instead, LA survives on three massive, aging lifelines: the Colorado River Aqueduct, the State Water Project, and the LA Aqueduct from the Owens Valley. This three-lifeline system was once considered the gold standard of urban engineering, but by 2030, all three are projected to fail simultaneously. The Colorado River, as we've discussed, is in a state of terminal decline. While California has senior rights over Arizona, it is not immune to the cuts coming in the 2026 renegotiations. The State Water Project, which brings water from the Sierra Nevada mountains in the north, is tied to a snowpack that is projected to shrink by 30% in the next decade. In recent drought years, the allocation from the State Water Project to Southern California has dropped as low as 5%, meaning the city received almost nothing from its primary northern source. The third lifeline, the LA Aqueduct, is a relic of 1913 that drained the Owens Valley so thoroughly it created one of the largest sources of dust pollution in the country, a dry lake bed that the city is now legally required to spend billions of dollars watering just to keep the toxic dust down. LA's internal infrastructure is a nightmare of deferred maintenance. With an average pipe age of over 70 years, the city suffers thousands of water main breaks every year, catastrophic failures that send millions of gallons of precious, imported water rushing down the streets of Hollywood and East LA. The energy required just to move this water over the Tehachapi Mountains is the largest single use of electricity in the entire state of California. LA isn't just a city. It is a water pumping operation that happens to have a city on top of it. By 2030, a simultaneous failure of the Sierra Snowpack and the Colorado River would force Los Angeles into emergency rationing levels we haven't seen since the Great Depression, a limit of 50 gallons per person per day, no green lawns in Beverly Hills, no car washes in Santa Monica, and a mandatory reduction for every business in the basin. 13 million people living in a Mediterranean climate with a water supply of a desert outpost. Los Angeles is the most successful artificial environment in the world, but it is an environment that requires 24/7 mechanical life support, and the batteries are running out. We have reached the top of the list. The two cities that define the American struggle against the desert, starting with number 2, Las Vegas, Nevada, a city that is often called the empire the desert wants back. Las Vegas is a geographical impossibility. It is a neon-lit metropolis of 2.3 million people sitting in the middle of the Mojave Desert, surrounded by nothing but sun-scorched rock and heat that can literally melt the asphalt off the roads. Las Vegas is perhaps the most famous example of human hubris in history, but it is also, ironically, the most water-efficient city on this entire list. To understand the crisis in Vegas, you have to look past the fountains of the Bellagio and the swimming pools of the Strip. Those are just window dressing. The real story is 90% of the city's water comes from a single, dying source: Lake Mead. Lake Mead was once the largest reservoir in the United States, a massive 9.3 trillion-gallon body of water held back by the Hoover Dam. But today, it is a hollow shell of its former self. If you visit Lake Mead right now, you will see the bathtub ring, a white, mineralized scar on the canyon walls that rises 170 feet above the current water level. This is not just a visual oddity. It is a measurement of a vanishing civilization. Las Vegas has fought harder than any city on earth to survive. They have ripped out millions of square feet of ornamental grass. They have outlawed non-functional turf. And they recycle nearly every single drop of water that goes down an indoor drain. If you flush a toilet in a Vegas casino, that water is treated, cleaned, and pumped back into Lake Mead to be used again. This closed-loop system is a miracle of 21st century engineering, but it has one fatal flaw. It only works if there is water in the lake to begin with. In 2020, out of pure desperation, the Southern Nevada Water Authority finished the third straw, a $1.5 billion tunnel bored to the solid rock at the very bottom of the lake bed. They did this because the first 2 intake straws were literally about to suck air. The nightmare scenario for Las Vegas is a number: 895 feet. This is a Deadpool elevation. Below 895 feet, water can no longer flow through the Hoover Dam. The turbine stops spinning. The electricity for the entire region vanishes. and the lake becomes a stagnant puddle trapped behind millions of tons of concrete. Even the billion-dollar third straw has physical limits. The 1922 Colorado River Compact, which governs this water, was written during the wettest decade in 1,200 years. We built a civilization based on a historical fluke. By 2030, as the megadrought intensifies and the Colorado River's inflows continue to climb by 20%, Las Vegas will reach a crossroads where no amount of recycling can save it. If the lake hits Deadpool, the casino industry, the entire economic engine in Nevada, will face an immediate, permanent shutdown. Property values will collapse, insurance companies will flee the state, and 2.3 million people will discover that in the Mojave Desert, water is the only currency that matters. Las Vegas is the most prepared city on our list, yet it is the one most vulnerable to a single catastrophic point of failure, the death of the lake. And that brings us to number 1, Phoenix, Arizona, ground zero for the American water collapse. Phoenix is the fastest growing city in the United States, a sprawling, sun-baked grid of 5 million people that has added nearly 1 million residents in the last decade alone. More people moved to Phoenix since 2010 than live in the entire city of Denver, and yet Phoenix is a city where every single metric of survival is flashing bright red. Phoenix draws its life from 2 shrinking systems, the local Salt River Project and imported Central Arizona Project. Both are in a state of terminal decline. But the real horror of Phoenix is its groundwater. In parts of the Phoenix metro, the water table is being pumped out at a rate of 3 to 1, meaning for every gallon that nature puts back into the ground, humans are pulling 3 gallons out. The math of Phoenix has finally caught up with the reality of the desert. In 2023, the Arizona state government took an unprecedented step. They quietly halted new construction approvals in parts of unincorporated Maricopa County. The reason was simple and terrifying. They could no longer certify that there was enough groundwater to support new houses for the next 100 years, which is a legal requirement for building. This wasn't a green initiative or a political stunt. It was the state government looking at a spreadsheet and realizing the water was gone. Phoenix is landlocked. It cannot build a desalination plant like a coastal city. It is surrounded by thousands of miles of desert, and its only backup, the aquifer, is being drained into extinction. The climate projections for Phoenix are a vision of a literal furnace, with 120-degree days projected to increase dramatically by 2030, accelerating the evaporation of the very canals that keep the city alive. Phoenix is the first major American city to face a genuine structural mismatch between its population and its physical environment. This isn't a theory. We have seen this happen before. We saw it in Jackson, Mississippi, where a system simply gave out, leaving 150,000 people with no water pressure for weeks. These are the ghosts of our future. So, what do you do with this information? You act. First, you must know your source. Every city in America publishes a consumer confidence report. Find yours, read it, and see where your water comes from. If your city is more than 50% dependent on a single, declining source, you are in a danger zone. Second, you must build a water buffer. The federal recommendation of 1 gallon per person per day is the bare minimum for survival, not for comfort. A family of 4 needs 56 gallons for a 2-week emergency. But in a true structural collapse, you need 30 days of storage. Buy food-grade containers. Treat them with unscented bleach and rotate them. Third, you must factor water into your major life decisions. If you're buying a home or relocating, use tools like the World Resources Institute's Aqueduct Map. Do not buy into a system that is structurally failing. The memo has been sent. The faucets are still running, and the toilets are still flushing, but the infrastructure of the 20th century cannot sustain the population of the 21st. We build an empire on the assumption that water is a constant, but nature is a variable. The reservoir didn't empty yesterday. It's been emptying for years. You just never looked. Now that you have, the question isn't if the system breaks, it's when. And more importantly, will you be ready when the morning comes and the water doesn't? This is the reality of the great thirst. The clock is ticking. The lakes are sinking, and the desert is waiting to take back what was never ours to begin with. Stay informed, stay prepared, and remember, data is the only thing that can save you when the magic of the system finally runs dry.